Grace Bible Church Pearlside online. When we see other people succeed in life, even worse, people we're not so fond of, why do we feel so inadequate? Our family from Corvallis, Oregon, Pastor Seth Trimmer, will share the solution to the dilemma of comparison. In his message, what is that to you?
I've got a confession I'd like to make with you guys this morning. So if, for those of you who are unfamiliar with me, you're going to get awkwardly familiar here in the next few moments. This might be a little bit of TMI for some of you, but I just felt the need for, my own personal soul therapy kind of person to let you know a little bit about my background and struggles. So I've had this issue in my life where I have had a very difficult time with comparing myself to others. Now I'm not sure if you've had this issue or not, but I can remember very early in childhood that it would rarely matter how well I did at anything. It really just mattered how well I did at things in comparison to my friends and my brother and people around me. If I brought home a report card, a B could either be amazing if my brother got a C, or could be terrible if my brother got an A. It was really so dependent on how everyone was around. And I found myself that unable to celebrate what was happening in my life if there was something better going on for someone else. And I always found myself looking over my shoulder at everyone and just making sure that I was staying ahead of the curve and things were going well. And all the way into college, I was a quarterback. And for those of you that either don't know much about or care very little about football, showing up in Pastor Norman's church was an interesting choice. But I totally get it. That's totally fine by me. But the quarterback is just the guy that throws the ball. So I did that in high school. And when I got to college, I played quarterback to begin with. But I was 6th on the depth chart. But I didn't feel terrible because there were 7 quarterbacks. There was at least one guy beneath me. Although he quit after the first week, which left me the bottom of the barrel. Hence, I switched to receiver very quickly. This has been a thing for me. And I'm pretty sure this is not just a thing for me. I'm pretty sure this is a human thing. And without making you awkwardly, raise your hands and spill your guts to all your friends and favorite strangers in the room, I think all of us on some level can identify with this sense of competition, this sense of comparison, this almost insecure, almost a little bit of a jealousy bug that tends to bite us and leave us without a sense of contentment with what's happening in our world, or what's happening with our path or growth or journey, and it's always fixated on simply what's happening around us. I don't know if you've had the chance to travel outside of your cultural context much. As I get older, I've had the chance to do so a couple of times and go to Europe and a few other places. And one of the things that I've found about that experience is that it's ironically taught me more about my own culture than it has anyone else's. Because once you're outside of your setting, outside of your context, outside of where the air you breathe, and everyone just kind of seems to embrace their culture because it's just normal, and you go into a different culture, you quickly start realizing how abnormal you are. You quickly start realizing how weird you are. And America, especially the mainland, is so competitive. It's so competitive. It is so at times jealousy driven, and is so consumed with how others are doing in relation to ourselves. And what I've found now as a Christian over these last several years is that the Bible has a lot to say about this as well. This doesn't seem to be a Seth thing or just an American thing. This seems to be a human thing that we have a very quick tendency to do. So what I would like to do is I'd like to look into the Bible. I'd like to look into the scriptures to one passage that I think specifically talks about this, and then process through it a little bit. Now, we're going to look in John 20 for anyone that's wanting to pull out a Bible and look there. If you just want to use the electronic version on your phone or whatever else, that's all good too. And John 20. Now, John 20 is a passage in the Gospel according to John. So this is a biographical account of Jesus' life written by a man named John. And chapter 20 is just following Jesus' death. He's been dead for 3 days, and now we're going to see that the rumors start spreading that he's alive, that people start going to his tomb and seeing that it's actually empty. And so this is some of the backdrop and some of the setting of what's happening in John 20. Now, if you're familiar with kind of the church and Bible sort of thing, that this is a passage that you've probably read, that you've probably heard, and most likely on some kind of Easter message or two, because it deals with the resurrection of Jesus, and Easter celebrates not Easter bunnies, but actually the resurrection of Jesus, in case you were wondering. But for those of you that might be visiting here, might be a guest here at Grace Bible, first of all, welcome. I'm a guest here too, so solidarity. And you might not be very familiar with the Bible, and I think that's brilliant. I think that's awesome, because what we're going to discuss here in John 20 is actually a little bit of a fresh angle or perspective on this story that for many that have processed and seen this a few times, maybe you haven't quite processed or seen before. So you get to see it with some fresh eyes and hopefully be on the same page with us as we work through some of this things. So let's look in John 20, which says it's early on the first day of the week. While it was still dark, Mary Magdalene, who was one of Jesus' followers, went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. She gets freaked out and decides she has to go tell the rest of the disciples. And so she goes running to Simon Peter and the other disciple. Now, just a quick note here. When you would write stories in the ancient Near East, at the time that this gospel was written, it was a very common literary practice that if you are actually a character in your own story, if you're telling some kind of historical account of something that happened, but you happen to be a part of that story, that you would not use your own name. You would not reference yourself by name in that story. It was a very, very common thing. And so John is the author of this thing, and John is referring to himself. He's saying that Mary Magdalene came running to Peter, Simon Peter, and to himself. But instead of using his name John, he refers to himself as, quote unquote, the other disciple. This is like his pseudonym. But what you need to take notice of here is just to clarify who this vague other disciple might be, you know it's the one Jesus loved. She came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, you know, the one that Jesus actually loved. Right? So already, got a little bit of a right hook in to Peter here, right? So track with this. She says, they have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him. Next one. So Peter and the other disciple started running for the tomb, because this is amazing, earth-shattering kind of news. So both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter. And he reached the tomb first. Now, I'm not sure why that detail needed to be in there, because when you outrun someone, it's not like you arrive second, right? But the other disciple, remember the one that Jesus loved, was in a foot race with Peter, and he won. And just in case you're not clear about what winning means, he got there first. You good so far? So this other disciple bent over and looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came along behind him, because remember, he lost the race. Are we good there? He lost the race. And went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. And finally, the other disciple, who had reached the tomb first, just in case you might have forgotten, also went inside. He saw and what? Believed. Because when Peter got there, he just barreled straight into the tomb. And Peter's a little bit slow in the uptake, you got to understand. So he's looking around, and he sees some linen, and there's no dead body, and he's just thinking, what does all this mean? It's kind of like on your computer, right, when it's like slows down and you get that circle rainbow ball of death, right? Just processing. That's Peter. What could this mean, all right? And John walks in. What happens for him? He just believes. He just gets it. So, to review, Peter and John, or quote unquote the other disciple, and just so we're clear, John is the writer of this thing. Just so we're clear, he's the disciple that Jesus loved, right? He's the disciple with obviously great faith, greater faith than Peter, well, he can kind of beat Peter in a foot race if he has to. Do you see what's going on here? You see what's going on? There, if you look at the prior relationship between Peter and John, earlier in the writings about Jesus and the gospel stories, you see that they kind of had this petty rivalry. And it seems to come to a head here, doesn't it? And it's a little bit, you look at it a little bit strangely, because think about this for a moment. Think about the story that John is writing here. Most of the time we just read the story and we're reading about like the tomb, Jesus' tomb, the tomb is empty, and we're thinking to ourselves, how significant this is. Now, maybe you don't believe that Jesus rose from the dead. Maybe you're not sure if Jesus actually rose from the dead, and brilliant. So happy you're here. But just, you don't have to believe it right now, but just take a second to consider the implications of that. Consider the implications of a man named Jesus from Nazareth who claimed to be the Messiah, which just means the anointed king, anointed one of God, who's king, not just of a nation, but of the world, and who also claimed to be the Son of God, like God in human flesh. And he was murdered, crucified, buried in a tomb, and 3 days later, the claim here is that he rose from the grave, which affirms that everything he said about himself was actually true. The writers are trying to tell you that everything that Jesus did and said, that this is to be taken as completely validated now, because look at the resurrection. Look at the resurrection. When dead people raise themselves to new life, you should listen to them and start taking them seriously. This is what you should do, right? Think, is there any possible claim in human history that is more significant than that? Now, I'm not saying that you have to believe that. I certainly hope that you do. I do. But think about that claim. If that's true, it changes everything. It means not only that there is a God, but he's not distant. He's not somewhere where he's unknowable or just somewhere out there. He's actually come into our world. He stepped into human flesh. He stepped into human history. And he's done something about our sin and our brokenness. He's done something about our separation from him. He's moved decisively in order to bring victory over our sin, victory over our death, and victory over our enemy, the devil. This is mind-bending, earth-shattering news. And when John is writing this account, when he's writing this account of Jesus' life, death, burial, and resurrection, when he gets to the pinnacle, zenith moment scene of Jesus' resurrection, he just can't help but include his little petty rivalry with Peter, how he was more loved, had greater faith, and faster speed. And what I find so shocking about this, is how something so profound like the resurrection of Jesus could be interwoven with such a petty story. This is such a small, insignificant, stupid little, right? We're talking about literally the most important claim in all of human history. And we are having this little rivalry between John and Peter thrown in our face. Because apparently in the ancient world, in the very early church, among Jesus' first and closest followers, there was the profound truth and beauty of the gospel that somehow ran hand in hand and in parallel with petty insecurity, politics, and jealousy. I'm so glad things have changed. Right, don't we do this a little bit? I don't know if you're a Christian or how long you've been a Christian or how long you've done the church thing, but it's like we come to church and we sing these songs about Jesus, like these amazing songs about Jesus. The worship team is doing their thing, and we're the lyrics are just proclaiming these astoundingly shocking claims about who Jesus is, giving worship to him. And we gather around the central idea that he is alive and present and wanting to forgive us and give us power and to change our lives and to set us free and to actually send us out to do amazing things in the world. We come here gathered around this thing, and I don't know about you, but it seems like at the same time where our minds should be so overwhelmed and consumed with the significance of the gospel and Jesus Christ, we can also be consumed with some pretty insignificant things as well. Like that music was a little too loud, or not loud enough, or too many guitars, or not enough guitars, or I don't know, the seats. Gray seats, really? It's a bit drab for Hawaii, maybe, I don't know. Or maybe the lights around here, blue lights. I got to tell you, they had purple lights for the earlier service. And now they're green, which I appreciate because I'm from Oregon, so that's nice. But I don't know what that's supposed to say about you guys, because purple is the color of royalty in the Bible. So apparently, there you go. Right? Yeah, because we come here to celebrate a resurrected Jesus that is making all things new. Like, I'm not going to hell. And if you're following him, like, neither are you. But then there's the parking. Oh, the parking. And it's like 15 miles away. I think it's on like Maui somewhere that you actually have to park, right? To take like a ferry over to get here. Like these early Christians, like, man, they died these brutal deaths, like eaten alive by lions and beheaded and crucified upside down. But you like have to come just to gather. You have to park and then ride in an air-conditioned shuttle. I don't know how you do it. It's just so, it's so difficult, isn't it? It's so difficult. Oh, and it's Sunday morning, and who wants to wake up on a Sunday? You've got beaches, literally 360 degrees. Who wants to go into church? We have this amazing, profound thing that we say we believe and that we center around with our worship. But yet, isn't it easy to be distracted by the things that are really insignificant? To give greater importance to things that really, on the universal scale, do not actually matter. And isn't it easy for some of those insignificant and unimportant, mundane, trivial things to actually become the distraction of the people sitting to our left and right? Of the ways in which we can look at them and actually gauge our own status, life, and success through them. Because it's one thing to be doing okay in life, but when you see someone else doing better. Because it's one thing to break the cycle of poverty in your family, be the first one to go off to college, scrape and scrap and work overtime to put together your first down payment on a house. And then your friends upgrade and buy twice the square footage as you. Because it's one thing to get laid off from work and your buddy who is not as smart, not as hardworking, gets the promotion. It's one thing when you're just trying to put food on the table and then you pull up in the church parking lot with someone who just got a brand new car, which, as far as I can tell, was probably a Toyota Tacoma or something. You guys are in love with Toyota Tacomas, my goodness. You just love them, which no fault. They're great cars, but my goodness, you love them. Or a Highlander. Highlanders and Tacomas, which are pretty much the same car. So at least you're consistent. Yeah. Yeah. We do this. And we typically reveal ourselves. We typically reveal where our heart is, and we reveal our insecurity, and we reveal how much we're actually looking to others and basing our contentment and joy based on the success or failure of others when it comes to two primary categories. The Bible talks about like God's people, God's church, loving one another. And this is a significant command, but it gives us some practical breakdowns of what loving one another is supposed to look like. And one of the two primary things, in my opinion, are the commands to mourn with those who mourn and celebrate with those who celebrate. And mourning with those who mourn, like, you can do that. That's not super hard. That's not that hard. Someone gets a rough time, all you do is just, you like throw some meals together, drop them off at their house, right? Like hey, if there's anything I can do, just let me know. Like that kind of line, right? It's not that bad. Because inwardly, it's very easy when other people are suffering and hurting and going through rough times to inwardly be celebrating, because at least it's happening to someone else. Or maybe at least it's you know what, they've had the silver spoon. They've had it so easy. They know nothing about my struggle. Finally, it seems like the universe is evening things out a bit. And we give them the furrowed brow and say, I'm so sorry for your loss, or I'm so sorry for what you're going through. But inwardly, we're thinking like, well, it's about time. It's about time. Yeah, it's not tough to mourn with those who mourn, but I'll tell you what reveals our insecurity more than anything is the command to celebrate with those who celebrate. Sometimes the hardest words to say to someone are, good for you. When they landed the job that you really wanted. When they got brains and beauty. When they lost the weight that you were wanting to lose. When their kid is doing calculus in kindergarten. Right? That's a sore one here, apparently. Yeah, when they got the new Tacoma. That is so hard to fake. Mourning, but celebrating with those who celebrate. Good for you. I'm happy for you. And where I'm living, I got no AC. I got bars on my windows. But you have a nice mansion on the hill. You know what? So happy for you. Praise God for that. When you cannot say that without feeling like a dagger is going into your own heart, that's when you know you are actually loving someone else and not just insecure and only caring about yourself. But it seems like this is one of the most difficult things to do. And what I'm so grateful for is that the Bible doesn't hide this stuff from us, right? Because if you're John writing a gospel about Jesus, what is your top priority to communicate? That Jesus was alive, said he was the Son of God, died on the cross, was buried for 3 days, and was risen again. That's your priority. Why would you waste any kind of literary real estate by inserting this petty little rivalry between you and Peter? Well, A, because it really happened, and B, because there's going to be a lot of people to come in the centuries later. They're going to become this thing called a church, and they need to know that no matter how profound and beautiful the resurrection of Jesus is, of all the dimensions that we hold most near and dear of worship and faith, there is always the threat of jealousy and pettiness and the insignificant leaking in to rob us from the glory and the beauty and the majesty of the gospel. Now, again, consider this for a second. If you are John and one of the early disciples, and it's all a lie, Jesus never did rise from the grave, and you're just making up a new religion in order to get yourself some power or some money or to get yourself at a televangelist show where you can sell a handkerchief for $19.95, if that's your plan, right? If that was your plan, if this whole thing is a hoax, as many people say Christianity is, why would you write your foundational literature which is throwing the top 2 leaders in the movement under the bus? I think this is one of the greatest evidences for the authenticity of the witnesses of the early church, because they're saying stuff. They had every possible factor working against them in the first century. It was impossible for Christianity to get off the ground. And all the material that included that threw all the early church leaders under the bus would have absolutely hurt them. Saying that a woman was the first one to report the resurrection of Christ, well, their testimony wasn't even admissible into a court of law at that period of time. Everything is written here would just discredit Christianity, and yet somehow Christianity just exploded all over the region. Why? Because it actually happened. Jesus actually did rise from the grave. All things are being made new, and the Spirit of God is being released upon all of God's followers, giving them the power to proclaim this good news and change the lives of others. But just because this amazing gospel is true does not mean somehow the realities of our pettiness and insecurities still don't weigh it down. So what do we do about this? What do we do about this? Well, what does Jesus do about this? I guess is the better question. Peter headed back up to the northern part of Israel, back to his hometown and his childhood profession. We can show the next slide, of fishing. And so here's where Peter went off to. Now, if you remember a little bit about the life of Peter, he denied Christ 3 times when he was at trial. He said he had nothing to do with Jesus 3 times publicly and completely abandoned him. And this is where Peter headed back to. This was like his home territory here. This is the Sea of Galilee, and this is where Peter would have done his fishing business here. And this is where Jesus comes back to Peter after his resurrection to reconcile with Peter. And so how do you reconcile with a guy who denies you 3 times? Well, here's how Jesus does it. Next slide. So it says that, when they had finished eating, Jesus said to Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? And Simon said, yes, Lord. You know that I love you. And Jesus said, feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he answered, yes, Lord. You know that I love you. And Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The third time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Now, how many times did he ask him if he loved him? How many times did Peter deny him? See it? For every time out of his mouth that he publicly denied Jesus, Jesus is now giving him the opportunity to publicly affirm his love for Jesus. Right? Right? Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, do you love me? He doesn't really get what's going on because this was actually really brilliant by Jesus. But again, Peter, just slow. Just a little slow. So he said, Lord, you know all things, and you know that I love you. And Jesus said, feed my sheep. Now, what's significant about this is Jesus is not just reconciling Peter to himself relationally, he's also reconciling Peter to his calling. Because he says, feed my lambs, take care of my sheep, feed my sheep. That's all language describing what Peter's role was meant to be as a shepherd, a caretaker of God's people, a leader in God's church. So track with this for a moment. Track with this. Peter backs out on Jesus at his moment of greatest need, completely punks out. Jesus comes to him with every right to say, Peter, you're finished and I want nothing to do with you. But instead gives him mercy and says, Peter, okay, I'll take you back. The next logical thing would for Jesus to say, however, since you did punk out on me before, I'm going to need you to reprove yourself again. You're going to start at the bottom, and you can work your way back up. Yeah? You can start at the bottom, and maybe you can earn some status again. But you know what? Trust is broken. It's violated. I don't know if I'm ready to go there yet. But what Jesus says, it says, no, Peter, I'm going to fully reinstate you. Because apparently Peter really likes broken leaders that walk with a limp, wounded healers, people who are able to get into the messiness of other people's lives because they know what messiness feels like. And when Jesus reinstates Peter, he fully reinstates. This is an amazing act of God's grace. Amazing and brilliant. And here's where he goes from there. He says, very truly, I tell you, Peter, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. And Jesus told him this to indicate the kind of death that Peter would die and ultimately glorify God. And then he says to him these epic words, follow me. So here's Jesus following up on his questions, and here's what he has to say to Peter. He says, Peter, here's my plan for you. Here's my plan for you. As you grow older, you're going to find that your life is filled with suffering and pain. But let me just tell you, Peter, that all the cowardice and all the punking out that you did in your past is over because I'm going to change you, Peter. You're going to be a man of courage. You're going to be a man of integrity. I'm going to change you by my grace, through my Spirit. You're going to be changed. And you're going to die the kind of death, even though it's going to be painful and difficult and humiliating, it's going to bring more glory to God than you could ever imagine. Your plan, your path, your purpose is beyond your imagination in terms of its eternal ramifications and significance, Peter. You're not just back in. I'm handing you the first class ticket to glorifying God, the very thing for which you exist, on a scale of which you could not even imagine, Peter. And then he says to him the same words he said to him on that same seashore just 3 years prior. All right, Peter. All right, Peter. All right, Peter. Follow me. Follow me. Let's do this, Peter. Let's get back at it. Now, you're Peter. You're Peter here. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? What are you going to do about this? Like the goosebumps should be about an inch or so raised off of your skin right now, right? Would you fall to your knees? Would you fall to your knees and just worship him? Would you just go give him a bear hug or something? Would you just start weeping? Would you start dancing for joy? What would you do? Of all the realistic things that we could consider ourselves doing in response to this, well, what does Peter do? Next slide. Peter turned and saw that the disciple whom Jesus loved, in case you forgot which one that was again, was following them. It's the same one that was at the Lord's table who asked who was going to betray him. And when Peter saw him, he asked, Lord, what about him? Peter, my plan and my path for you is going to be nothing short than amazing and ultimately glorifying to your God. It's of such eternal significance of which you cannot fathom it. And Peter's like, uh-huh. Uh-huh. Oh, no, that's great. That's great. Oh, no, that sounds good. Yeah, that sounds good. Quick question, though. What about him? I mean, no, don't get me wrong, Jesus. I appreciate it. I appreciate the offer. That's very generous. But can you at least tell me one thing? Is your plan for me at least as good as him? It's at least as good as him. And Jesus looks back at Peter and says, if I want him to remain alive until I die, what is that to you? You must follow me. Jesus has a moment where he has to interrupt this guy who's not getting it and respond with the silliest and stupidest concern you could possibly ever have. When my oldest son was 6 years old, I was having a bedtime, like tucking all my kids in at bedtime, and they all shared a room at this time. And so they're all jammed in, and my kids are like, they're crazy, but they have their sweet moments. And one of the sweetest part about my sons is they love sleeping together. Like they'll just snuggle all night, and especially when they were little. And so even though they shared a room and had their own beds, like you could put them in their own beds and command them with the threat of spanking to stay in their own beds, but they would oftentimes just like get in their own bed and just have their arms and legs draped over each other and fall asleep like that. It was really sweet. It was super sweet. It was as sweet as they ever get. It was when they were asleep. Once they woke up, it was all bets were off. but at least it's while they were asleep, I guess. So I was tucking in my kids, and my oldest son says to me, Daddy, why is it that Jesus had to die? And I remember thinking to myself, this is like the golden platter moment as a parent, right? Do you dream of this opportunity? Oh, what a question. And my eyes got big, and all my theological treatise and Bible reading and discipleship I've ever done in my life, and all of it's now about to download to my oldest son, right? I'm about to shape the legacy, like of my future, right in this moment, right? And I look at my son, and I said, oh, that's a brilliant question. Oh, that is the best possible question. Let me tell you, because he loves you so much, and he came to die for your sins so that you could be forgiven. And I just start going off on the gospel. And then in the middle of it, one of my younger sons burps in his ear. And so he turns around and slugs him, and then a fight ensues. And of course, I'm like, and he loves you, and he because of your sins, and he wants to forgive that. I'm like, okay, fine, stop it. And I'm pulling one off the other. I'm setting them down in timeout. I'm trying to finish the gospel story, and all they're doing is just yelling and pointing and calling each other names like poo-poo head and everything else. But the gospel, but Jesus, and he loves you. And this is going to change your life and your destiny and my legacy. Would you please listen? How could you lose track of something so important by something so unimportant? I remember when I was sitting across from a college student one time, and I was sharing the gospel with him at a coffee shop. And if I do say so myself, I was sharing the gospel. I mean, I was on fire. Like, this was good stuff. Like, as good as it gets out of me, I'll tell you what. And I was like, it was accurate and concise and compelling. And I remember looking at this guy and saying, so Jesus has now died for you and is now offering you forgiveness and hope and new life and given a plan for your life. So will you give your whole life to him, trusting him as Lord and Savior? And I sat there waiting for his response, convinced he was going to begin weeping any moment and give his life to Jesus. And he just said, uh-huh. But what about the dinosaurs? Oh. Yes, I'm offering you salvation. But what about T-Rex? I guess that's Jurassic Park. Yes, let's talk Jurassic Park. Good, great. You ever had one of those moments where like a significant moment was interrupted by something so unimportant? Yeah, this was Jesus, 24/7. I can't imagine the guy's patience. Like, Jesus' patience is off the charts. Would you agree? What is that to you, Peter? You must follow me. But Jesus, you don't understand. This guy, he has always been nipping at my heels. He's the brown noser. He's the one that's always nestling up to you, trying to act like he's your best friend. He's always undercutting me. He's always dogging me. He's always trying to take my spot as the leader of this crew. You don't understand, Jesus. Am I going to at least be able to have something better than him? Come on, man, don't you? He's just a brown noser. He's not for real. What is that to you, Peter? Early in the Bible, there was this list of 10 commands that are given, known as the 10 Commandments. Clever title, I know. And these 10 Commandments were a central way of understanding what it meant to live the life of God. And of these 10 Commandments, there's some very common and basic ones, like don't murder and don't steal and don't commit adultery and don't lie. And these commands are always been noted as very, very practical and externally observable commands. Like if I kill you, you will notice that, correct? You will likely notice it. If I steal something, it means I've taken something tangible. You can see it. But there was this 10th command. This 10th command which said, you shall not covet. You shall not covet. And theologians for centuries and centuries have gone crazy over this command because it seems to be unique. Because I can tell when you murder, I can tell when you steal, I can tell when you lie, I can tell when you've committed adultery, but how can I tell when you're coveting? I could be coveting you right now. Mm-hmm. You could be coveting me, which I totally understand, but you could be. I could be completely coveting Pastor Norman in this moment. Somewhere I probably am. But how would you know? One of the interesting things about the 10th Commandment is you have to understand a little bit about the original language, which is Hebrew, and the way that it's written is very, very nuanced. So the terminology that says, thou shalt not, in the Hebrew, it's actually ambiguous. It could go one of two ways. It could literally mean, don't covet, don't do it, like a command not to. But it can also mean a promise, meaning this: if you follow and trust God, if you understand his grace and you receive him and trust him with all your life, then you will not covet. See, we get so focused on all the thou shalt nots, as if they're just these commands, this no-no list. But in reality, they were always meant to be flipped and go another way. And now in Christ, they actually aren't just commands, they're promises. That when you follow Jesus, when you fixate yourself on his grace and love, you won't want anyone else's stuff. You won't want anyone else's life. You won't need anyone else's metabolism. You won't need anyone else's resume. And you won't want anyone else's kids. When you trust Jesus, when you follow him, when you see him, you shall not covet. You shall not covet. Which I think makes the question that Jesus presents to Peter brilliant and compelling, and I think it needs to resonate in our ears as well. What is that to you? This amazing gospel that promises you reconciliation with your Creator, which promises you forgiveness, though you're completely undeserving of it, though God has every right to turn his back on you. Instead, he chose to send his son for you, in your place, to suffer the consequences of your mistakes. And this beautiful gospel is meant to captivate us and reveal the love of God to us and draw us into the love and grace of God. Can sometimes feel like it's railroaded or off-put by the insecurities of our heart that are still judging other people around us and comparing ourselves to them. We usually do this by comparing other people's external lives to our inward feelings, and that's just a game you'll never win. You'll never win that. People will always be able to look better on the outside than you will feel on the inside. And I don't care how much money you got, how successful you are, how much you seem like you have going for you now. If you've got 14 Tacomas in your driveway at home at this moment, inwardly, we're all broken. Inwardly, we're all a little messed up. Inwardly, we're all a little bit insecure. What is that to you? Because God has a path for you that literally no one else can walk. The harsh reality is while we're equally loved and called, we are not all equally gifted. and you're just going to have to deal with that. That some people do win in the genetic lottery. That some of us do have musical ability and athletic ability and good looks. That some of us do come from families of money and influence and have everything else going for us at the same time. But Jesus would look at you in the face, not judging you simply by a curve of everyone else around you. And he will hold you to account for your gifts, your talents, how he's made you and what he's called you to do, who he's called you to influence, who he's called you to reach, which I can't reach, who Norman can't reach. You have a career that I can't do. You have things you're meant to impact and influence in our culture and our world that no one else can do except you. And Jesus will look at you in the eyes and say, what did you do about that? What did you do about your path and your calling? How did you glorify me? And every time we want to start thinking about everyone else around us, it seems like either they have it easier or better in any possible category. What is that to you? You must follow me. And the beauty of this is we get to be set free to have joy, peace, and contentment. And we are liberated to love one another, not just by mourning when they mourn, but then we can genuinely celebrate when they celebrate. Oh, I'm so happy for you. Congratulations. Good for you. And we can mean it because we're saved by grace. Because God looks us in the eyes and says, what is that to you? What is that to you? I love you, I died for you, and I'm going to be with you forever. Don't you waste an ounce of your energy or emotions concerning yourself with how you stack up. It's a game you will always, always lose. You'll either be depressed or arrogant. Depressed or arrogant. Either way, you lose, and so does the kingdom. But if you can see Jesus, if you can see the bigger beauty and profound nature of the resurrected Christ, to know his love that runs deep for you, and the plan that he has for you, well, then you shall not covet. Let's pray. Father, thank you for these amazing people. God, I'm thankful for this church. God, I know this is a church where grace is something real. I know it's not just in their name. I know it's in reality in so many lives here. God, I thank you that there are so many here who are embodying this reality, who are following you, trusting you, who are truly celebrating and mourning sincerely. But Father, I know that we all struggle in some ways. I know that it's just so easy to look over our shoulders, and it's so easy to get caught up in our insecurities and our jealousies. So Father, I'm asking that all the petty things that are getting in the way of seeing the beauty of your Son Jesus, his death and resurrection, I'm asking that you would cause them to fade into the background. For everyone who's sitting here who can immediately see a name or a face of someone they've always been looking up to or comparing themselves against, Jesus, I'm asking that you would change our hearts from coveting to love. Jesus, by your grace, would you fulfill your promise that said we wouldn't covet, that we wouldn't want anyone else's life, that we wouldn't look over our shoulder, but that we would follow and trust you. God, I want to thank you for the healing you're going to bring to our hearts, for the peace that you're going to settle in our souls, for the joy that's going to come as we come to terms with how you've made us and the plan you've given us. We thank you for this, Father. It's in the name of your amazing and glorious and gracious Son, Jesus, that we pray. Amen.